Welcome to the podcast. I'm Danielle Goodrick, Knowledge Product Manager for CIPS, and joining me today I have Scott Dance, Director of Hayes Procurement and Supply Chain. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Danielle.
Great to have you here. Scott's got over 18 years' experience advising clients on workforce management solutions and provides strategic leadership for Hayes Procurement, Logistics, Supply Chain divisions in the UK and Ireland. CIPS and Hayes have worked together now for 7 years on developing the salary guide across 6 global regions. And throughout the partnership, Hayes have provided their expert guidance and support for CIPS members, helping procurement and supply professionals with their career development and talent management. We're really excited to be able to launch the 2021 findings. And today I'm going to be talking to Scott about how to own your career development plan. So Scott, how do you go about owning your own career development plan?
Yeah, good question to start off with. I think that the key things are that even if you're not considering moving, it's never too early to start career planning and never too late also. So it's about setting some long-term objectives. First of all, you'll no doubt need to upskill or reskill in certain areas. And don't just think about the technical areas, but think about the softer skills that you may need to succeed in your career as well. Also, organise a consultation with a recruiter or somebody that's got lots of experience in terms of building their own career, because actually you'll get some great learns out of some experts. Again, doesn't mean that you're looking for a new role. It may just mean that you just need some kind of career guidance around what the future looks like for you. And I guess make sure that you're practicing your interview skills. Now, yet again, you may be going for an internal promotion rather than leaving your organization. But actually, it doesn't hurt to kind of brush up on those and hone in on what is really important in terms of your own career development and what you want to get out of your future role. Make sure you've got an updated CV and it's constantly updated every 6 months or so. Don't be the person that waits 5-6 years before actually updating your CV. You'll forget half the good stuff that you've actually done. And more importantly than ever, look at your social media profile. So that's everything from your LinkedIn to other social media accounts, and making sure that you are wanting to be portrayed in the right light and the right aspects that's important to you for your own career. And I guess that's kind of a starting point, really.
That's a good starting point there. And what are the key elements that should be considered when building your career plan? You talked about, obviously, short, medium, long-term goals and breadth of experience. So what are the key elements that you would say?
So I think it's really important to start with a long-term goal and then work backwards. So start thinking about, what does the next 5 year hold? Do I want to be a head of procurement? Do I want to be a category manager? Do I want to be in an ops management position? Whatever they may look like. Once you've got that defined goal in place, you can then work backwards. So then look at your 3-year plan, your 2-year plan, your 1 year plan, and then you can start working out what skills you will need to be able to get to that 5-year plan. Again, there could be some upskilling in there from a qualification point of view. It may be reading a load of podcasts. It may be having a mentor. It could be a whole host of different things. But make sure that you've got your long-term objectives set up first of all, then your medium and your short-term. And make sure you're breaking them down, because actually 5 years is a long, long way away. And you may not think you're progressing if you just set that long-term goal, where actually if you have some benchmarks along the way, you'll actually be able to have some kind of things that you've ticked off, and also kind of a good feeling that you're working towards that end goal.
Thanks, Scott. And I guess different sector experience or different experience across categories will really help with that plan as well, in terms of that kind of broader outlook. We continue to see technical procurement skills are really important for procurement to build credibility, but soft skills dominate the salary guide again this year, and we've seen that for the last few years across all levels. So how do you feel soft skills or the prevalence has changed?
Yeah, so I suppose it's hard to kind of often monitor what soft skills you have versus what you think you need in the future. And it's very easy from a technical skills to say, have I got that qualification? Yes or no, quite simply. What we're seeing more of, and this isn't really necessarily anything to do with COVID, it's kind of probably the last 7 years now, that if you look to the first salary guide to the one that's going to be coming out in a month or so, is actually around kind of adapting to change. And I think that's even more prevalent now during COVID. And the agileness you can flip to one project or one program or one category and move into a next category using your technical skills as a baseline. I think what we're seeing more and more is now a willingness to learn and learn new skills. We're all going through, and most of our businesses are going through a number of different changes. For example, doing a podcast online a year or so ago, we were learning how to do those. And hopefully now we're a bit more astute and a bit more professional in the way we conduct them, as an example. But this coincides with doing your job in terms of liaising with your stakeholders internally. How do you communicate with those? It's very different doing it on a Teams call or Zoom call as it is face-to-face. And then kind of externally, your stakeholder management, which is ultimately key. How do you get across those negotiations? And probably the hardest thing to do is negotiating. And actually to do that online is even harder than it's ever have been. So I think there's a few skills that you need to look at. And just to go on to that is kind of your agileness and adaptability. How adaptable are you to change? Yeah. The next thing is communication, which is probably the key thing. How are you communicating internally and externally? And how do you need to adapt your approach to deal with different challenges that may well come along throughout the next year and beyond that?
That's some good advice. And communication comes up time and time again, and predominantly focused internally, interestingly, in terms of internal stakeholder management and buy-in. So some good tips there on agility as well. So if we go back to career plans and your advice for someone approaching their career plan, or perhaps a conversation about a promotion opportunity with their line manager, how would they go about that?
Yeah, that's always a tricky one if you're looking at internal promotions, I suppose, especially given the kind of environment that we're in now. People feel a little bit more nervous around asking for a promotion, given that in some sectors their businesses may not well be functioning that well. But I think the first thing to do is actually be really honest with yourself and assess your own performance. People often say, I want to be promoted. I haven't been promoted for 2 or 3 years. Well, actually, what has your performance been like within those 2 or 3 years? Have you constantly outshone your peers within your organization? Have you constantly hit your targets? And what has your value been? And this is a kind of a question overall for procurement. What has your value been to that organization? And actually, if you can sit down wholeheartedly and say, actually, on each of those areas over a period of time now, I've constantly delivered, then that should hopefully form a basis of your promotional conversation to your line manager. And I think it's very clear as well to be open and upfront, and it kind of goes with communication again, is that actually when you're sitting down with your line managers, make sure you're clearly communicating what your aspirations are. Employers hate it when they speak to their employees on a regular basis and say, how are you doing, how are you getting on? And the employee says, I'm absolutely fine, when actually you may not be fine. And actually have things around, I'm concerned about where I'm going, I'm concerned about my career and what it looks like. And actually employers were far more likely to start looking at succession planning and looking at how they can get you to that next level and having an open and detailed conversation. But also on the flip side to that is make sure that if you are going for promotion, you are prepared to step up into that role, and you are prepared often to take home some extra workload. And you are willing and prepared to kind of make that next move into that next position, or prepare to go on those courses that your managers might suggest you to go on. Hopefully that answers that question, Danielle.
It does. I think that it's interesting you brought up communication, because often it is articulating what your aspirations are and then identifying, like you say, where the skills gaps are and where perhaps you need to work on those to get to that next point. I think that's interesting, but being open and honest is always, it's often difficult, but the best policy in that respect, isn't it? Really, to understand where your career could go in your current team. Perhaps your manager might be leaving or has their own career plans, or whether you do need to look externally for different experience or across different departments. So that's really interesting.
And I also think that, sometimes when people see those conversations and negotiating for themselves, rather than on behalf of a supplier, that's often the hardest conversation. And sometimes the perception is that it's got to be conflict because I'm basically going against my boss, but actually that's not necessarily the case. And I think that, again, employers far more respect those that have an open conversation with them about their career plans and their career journeys, rather than it being kind of a conflict with a battle saying, I want to be promoted, and the employer saying, well, we can't. So just make sure that, again, articulation is key around that and how you communicate that. And hopefully it should be more of a fun conversation, an enjoyable conversation than kind of conflict management, so to speak.
No, and having the facts to back it up, like you say, where the value's been added and what you have delivered will really help that conversation. So, no, that's some good points there. Obviously, going back to the salary guide then, salary continues to be the most important factor every year when changing roles. That isn't going anywhere. But what other factors should you consider when changing roles?
Yeah, I think it probably coincides a little bit about what we spoke about earlier around career progression. It's always important to find out what the next role is. Where does your role that you're going to go to, where does that fit within the organization? You should always be finding out about what the overall aspirations are of not just the procurement function within that organization, but where the organization are looking to go to as well. Are they looking to expand and grow rapidly, or are they looking to consolidate a little bit, which will then obviously enhance whether or not that's of interest or not. I guess current times, we'll talk about job security. It depends on what industry and sector you're going into. So how has that industry performed during the pandemic, during Brexit, and all the other factors that have gone on recently? Because obviously that is pretty key. And then I think the next thing is, will you enjoy the work? I think that if people are moving just for salary, that's probably not the right motivation for moving, because we all get acclimatized to earning the amount of money that, the pay rise that we get after a few months. But actually, I've still got to enjoy the job. The other questions that are coming out a lot at the moment is, what does remote working look like, or hybrid working? Is there really true flexibility? Can I work different hours? Or once this pandemic is over, do I have to be in the office 5 days a week? So there's a whole host of different types of things to ask, and more intuitive questions to ask, as opposed to just thinking about pay rises.
Yes, and obviously the type of organisation they are, maybe their ethical stance and things like that as well, in terms of their purpose and strategy and things as well. So yeah, no, all good points there, and I think lots for consideration.
Yeah, and I think that we're also seeing more around kind of ED&I policies, just to go on to what you said a minute ago, Danielle. Employees or new employees of companies are kind of more forthcoming in asking questions to employers around their ED&I policy, their sustainability policies. So making sure, if you're an employer listening to this, that you make sure that you have the answers to the questions, because it could be quite tricky if you don't know. So just making sure that you're well prepared in what those are and what it looks like in the future.
No, that's good, Trev. And we can talk about that in a bit more detail on another of our podcasts in the series. So thank you so much for that. There are a number of these podcasts that we're releasing for the Salary Guide launch this year. So be sure to tune in to some of those. And thanks again, Scott. I hope you enjoyed it. And you can download the Salary Guide at cips.org/salary guide.
No problem. Bye.
Thanks, Scott.